Well, hello and welcome back to this week's session of Coaching to Confidence. It is so nice to have top real estate agents and loan officers joining us from all across North America. People like you and me that just want to become our very, very best. Hey, listen, if we haven't had the chance of meeting yet, hello, my name is Chris McGatt, and I head up the coaching division right here at Leaders Edge Training. It is such a pleasure to open today's session, but then also to facilitate the Q&A section. Now, speaking of the Q&A section, every week on Coaching and Confidence, we dedicate time to answer your questions. So, as Chris explores today's topics, as ideas come to mind, go right ahead and type those into the Q&A Zoom section right at the bottom of your screen. And we're going to hold those questions until the very end, second half of the program, and then we'll make sure we get your question answered. And as always, we stream live every single week to make sure we're covering the topics that are both timely and relevant. And each week we focus on one of four areas: lead generation, building your business and building your client base; sales skills, just to close more deals; inspiration to keep you going; and of course, business structure, because we've all got to figure out ways to work smarter, not harder. Now, this week, Chris is going to be focusing in on sales skills to close more deals. And the topic is tips to overcome those pesky objections. In fact, any kind of objection. Well, let's get started. Please help me welcome nationally recognized real estate expert, Chris Leader. Hello, Chris. Doesn't look like your normal backdrop there. I hear you're in Atlanta this week.
It is wonderful to see you, Chris. And yes, I am in Atlanta. I'm en route to Mexico. I'd like to tell you it's for a holiday, but I'm keynoting a convention on Tuesday and a different convention on Thursday, one in Playa, one in Cancun. So I have stopped in Atlanta at a friend of mine, and I wanted to ensure we had a really good internet connection to deliver today's session. So forgive me for my plain backdrop. I know it almost looks like a mugshot. We'll be back to our regular studio next week. So thank you,
Well,
Chris.
you
It's
are
great to see
crystal
you, by the
clear, so
way.
you're ready. You're ready.
All right. So listen, I always like to begin a little bit with the news because I think it's so important for us to have an idea what our clients are seeing, what they're reading, what they're hearing, what they're feeling, and what they're thinking. And there's been so much going on this week. You know it's going to make its way into the real estate community and how people are going to move forward with major life decisions. So let's just take a look at the news. Um, the world's on edge. You looking back or looking over this last week and the conflict in the Middle East. I mean, it's shocking, it's horrible, it's terrible, it's all of those things. But, and sometimes we in the West look at something on the other side of the planet and say, well, it is terrible, but it's over there. The reality of it is there's only 6 degrees of separation between all of us. And the knock on effect exists. What happens there affects us here and affects us in real estate. Like, for instance, if Iran gets involved in this, and I was reading about this morning, this conflict spreads. And if it spreads, we got a bigger problem. And I know I don't want to sound callous, but what we're looking at is the Middle East is the energy hub for the globe. Should Iran get involved, I read something this morning, the economists are forecasting oil to go to $150 a barrel. Now, last week we were talking about $100 a barrel, and we thought that was going to be high. Can you imagine what it would do if it literally doubled the price of gas? How does that affect us in real estate? Well, yeah, your costs are going to go up because of the transportation costs of all the goods around the world. So that it hits inflation. But add to that, if you've got clients, for instance, that commute at 30 minutes in the morning and 30 minutes in the evening on their way to work and on their way back, your client drives an F-150 and his cost to get to work double. His income doesn't. And what we're going to find is they're going to have to start to pull some of that income out of other areas of their life and apply it to transportation costs. So, it does have an effect. We're already dealing with inflation. The increase of transportation costs is only going to play into that. So in saying that, we want to be thoughtful about what happens in the Middle East because it's got that knock-on effect. The second thing in the news this morning, Chris, is the bombshell lawsuit goes to court and it puts our commissions on trial today. Now, the Canadians may say, well, that's a U.S. thing. I'm going to say, well, it's not just a U.S. thing because they announced that a similar class action lawsuit in Canada last week. So if you want to get a sense of what's going to happen in Canada, I'd recommend to the Canadians you start reading about that bombshell lawsuit and maybe follow Inman. They have some good reports on it. I was also reading this morning that the TD Bank said that the US, they had initially forecasted the US for a recession first quarter of 2024. The economy seems to be stronger than what they expected. So now they're talking second quarter. Why does that affect us? Because when our countries go into a recession, the government reduces interest rates to get the economy going again, which has a positive effect for us in real estate. So now they're looking at the second quarter in terms of a potential recession. They were initially looking at reducing rates. They expected the rates to go down in April, but now they're not thinking that they expect them to go down until July next year. Now, that's important for us in real estate because you're going to have buyers who are thinking about buying. Interest rates are going to affect the decision, and you've got a bit of a forecast on where things are going. Now, I would expect, Chris, with all of this uncertainty, inflation, high interest rates, two wars going on, a federal election, high housing prices, at a certain point, our consumer out there, even if they were interested, is going to say, you know what, maybe we should just slow this thing down a little bit. And that's incredibly frustrating for us in real estate. We invest a lot of our money to attract interest. When the interest comes in, we use all of our selling skills to convert those opportunities into prospects. Prospects are when somebody sits down and they finally sit down and they want to have a discussion about either selling their house or buying the next house. And our goal at that point is to convert them from a prospect into an actual client and then move that relationship along. I bring this up because I think it's pretty fair for real estate salespeople today, no matter what city you're in, to anticipate one of your clients or some of your clients saying, you know what, everything that's going on, I think we're just going to hit the pause button. And I think it's fair for real estate agents to feel frustrated under that experience. I think that, and I guess most of all, what I want to do is I want to prepare our audience should this come up in conversation and almost to expect it. If it doesn't, fabulous. But if it does, at least you're not going to feel like you got caught off guard. You won't be gobsmacked. You should have some answers because you were ready for it. So let's walk through. What I really want to deal with today is stalls, objections, and conditions and how they affect us in the real estate industry, so that our audience today, should somebody says I want to think about it, they're going to be prepared for that. So today's topic is going to be handling objections like a pro, hesitations, objections, and getting past the no. And I think that it's normal. Again, I want to say this: with all the things that are going on, it's normal for a consumer when they're making a big decision like buying a house or selling a house to just say, hey, let's just hang on to see where things go. And I want you prepared when that comes up in conversation. So let's talk about three different things that happen that look very similar. Objections. So I say this because what we don't want to do is confuse objections, stalls, and conditions or hesitations. Hesitation and a stall is the same thing. They sound very similar, Chris, and often people get confused with this, but you got to know what you're dealing with. And depending on the situation will depend on which strategies you're going to deploy. Now, I'm going to take you through all three of these today so that you have an understanding of what you're facing. But I do want to say for the record, most of the time, a really good presentation, be it a listing presentation for a seller or a buyer's presentation for a buyer, will handle most of the objections and help you overcome them. So if you want to take one big takeaway from today is build some really good presentations so that when you sit down with a consumer, whatever their concerns are, your presentation should answer 99% of them. Now, what is a hesitation? Now, often we get confused because we confuse hesitations and we confuse objections. And a hesitation is when a client says they want to think about it. Now, maybe you booked an appointment with somebody last week. You're going in for an appointment this week. You sit down with them, and in the appointment, everything's moving the way it's supposed to. And at the end, they throw you this curveball where they say to you, you know, I just want to think about it. Your job as a salesperson is to find out what it is they want to think about. You got to be able to stay there and ask the questions to uncover what it is. Because if you don't know what it is, maybe it's interest rates. Maybe they're concerned about the global wars that are going on right now. Maybe they're concerned about the price of gasoline or inflation, whatever it is. But if you know what it is, you have an opportunity to deal with it. And I find a lot of times people don't understand what they're looking at. So the stall is how somebody hides the real reason. You, as a sales professional, are going to say, hey, I understand it's a big decision. I don't want you to do anything that would make you feel uncomfortable, but what is it specifically that's holding you back? Now, here comes the real reason, Chris, and it bubbles up to the surface. Maybe it's we had an agent in, they said our house was worth more last night, or we want to wait till interest rates go down next year. Whatever it is, now we know it. And once we know what we're dealing with, then we'll know what to pull out of our toolbox to help persuade and give your clients, prospects, confidence that it's okay to move forward. So, but we got to know what it is first. And then we have something that I call a condition. And a condition is how the client, when a client is faced with making a decision, but they can't make the decision until something or someone else participates in the outcome. And you're thinking, well, what could that be? And I'll give you a couple of examples. A first one might be maybe you're on an appointment with a seller, and they do the I want to think about it. And you say to them, okay, it's a big decision. I don't want you to do anything you're not comfortable with. But what is it specifically that's holding you back? And they say something like, well, I'll be honest, I got to wait to see if my job transfer comes through. I've got this job transfer and a promotion, and if it comes through, we're going to be making a move. But if it doesn't, we're going to stay here. Now, as a sales professional, you need to be able to say to them, well, when should you be finding out about this transfer? And they say, well, it'll be a week from Friday, a week from this coming Friday. You say, okay, so you're a couple of weeks out, no problem. Now, you got to understand, there are no fancy words that you can use to change the way the person is feeling because it's not up to them. Something external's got to happen before they can make this decision. So there's no words here that are going to convince anybody or change anything. What you want to do in a case like that is you want to say, okay, a week from Friday, that's great. I tell you what, I'll stay in touch. If anything happens sooner, please let me know. I'd love to jump in and get the file started and get things moving. I mean, really, you're kind of handcuffed here. So what I would do in a case like that is instead of a week from Friday calling, I would call this Friday and I would say, hey, I know I'm a week early, but I was just checking in to make sure nothing has changed on your schedule. And don't be surprised if they say, I'm really glad you brought that up. I'm glad you called me because, to be honest with you, yeah, I did find out this morning we are moving ahead. When can you get over and get things started? So I always like to cut the call time in half so as not to miss that opportunity and lose it to somebody else. The other one you may run into where it requires third party could be an estate going through probate and it hasn't cleared probate yet. And when it does, the executors will be in a position to put it on the market. Again, there's no fancy words here that can change that situation. So you're going to need to make sure that you just get back in touch, cut the call time in half. So we have really three things we're dealing with in this category. We have stalls. It's not the real reason. It's how they hide it. We have objections. Those are the real reasons. And we need to figure out what those are. And then finally, we have conditions when it requires somebody else. Now, the truths about objections and understanding what we're up against. Objections are typically unanswered questions. The more you educate your clients during the appointment, the more your clients are going to have less objections. So the more information you bring to the presentation, the more market details, the more confidence and conviction, a deeper understanding of the local market, the more you're going to make them feel secure in making this big decision. The first objection you get from your clients is rarely the real objection. A lot of times they layer a situation with, well, we were hoping to get more money for our house. But then with a little further digging, you find out actually somebody was in last night and promised them they could get more than what your CMA is laying out. So as a sales professional, you got to dig around a little bit, like a detective almost, to find out what's going on here and to offer the right solution for the problem at hand. So that's why the questions are so important. Now, one of the other things I like to bring to people's attention during a presentation, It is so important at the front end of the appointment to gather up intel on why your client's making a move. And what you want to do is connect your presentation to that intel so we don't find ourselves creating new objections by stepping into a part of the conversation that we shouldn't. So what we really need to do is identify where the client's going, why they're going, what's all of this about. And we got to keep them connected to that if we want them to move forward. Be careful not to create new objections. The best salespeople are not the biggest talkers, they're the best listeners. So you ask questions, you listen carefully, and you're thoughtful before you speak so that you don't create new problems. Now, there are some things that come up you just can't fix. There are no words for it. There's nothing you can do to change the way the person's feeling. So you got to know that there are times when things are out of your control and you want to empathize, but you don't want to stay there too long. You want to move away from that situation. Let me give you an example. Maybe somebody says to you, the property taxes are high on this house, but we really love the house. So if you stand on the taxes too much, you're going to convince them not to move forward. On the other hand, if you highlight all the features about the property they love and it kind of goes hand in glove with a property of this quality, then the property taxes are going to be higher. You empathize, but then you point out the features on why they connected to it and connect them to the reasons they want to do something, not the reasons they shouldn't. Yeah, I mean, you can't, when somebody brings something up, you can't ignore it, but don't spend too much time standing on it. Because if you do, you got to know there are certain things you can't fix and certain things you can. So my suggestion is, acknowledge it, empathize with them, but then highlight the features that they really loved so that they have an understanding of why that is the case. Now, there are more solutions than there are actual objections out there. In the world of real estate, there's really only about 7, 8 objections. And as a master sales professional, you need to take a look at what those 8 objections are. You need to be prepared on any given appointment. This is going to come up. We want to find one first. We want to fix it up first. The other agent said it was worth more. The other agent said they'll do it for less. I got a friend in the business. We want to sell it ourselves and save the commission. There's only about 8 of these things. And I'd actually, as a sales professional, recommend that you write them all out and then come up with dialogues and scripts and talk tracks to overcome those situations so that when they do come up, you're going to be confident, you're going to be comfortable, you communicate with conviction, and that level of competence is attractive and it's exactly what people are looking for to give them the certainty to move forward with this big decision. Now, it's not always what you say, but it's learning to say it in such a way that isn't offensive. Sometimes we're tasked with the responsibility of dealing with a difficult part of the conversation. And my suggestion to you is learn how to say the tough stuff nicely. It's not always what you say. Sometimes it's how you say it. It's your tonality, your body language. All of that plays part of how the person is receiving the information you're sending them. So I want you to be thoughtful about how they're feeling as you communicate. Now, I believe in transparency. I believe in authenticity. I believe in clarity, but I also believe in kindness. So think about how you communicate that message. And especially if you feel like you've been attacked. If someone's attacking you in the conversation because of the commission rate or the price of their house, you need to be able to take a deep breath and be able to make your way through that. Now, the 3Ds to objection handling. If you want to get past the no, there's 3 things that you have to build into your objection handling. The first one is going to be, you got to have the determination. When somebody brings up an objection, you can't get up from the table. You got to stay there. If somebody says we need to think about it, you say, okay, well, think about it. Call me in a week. Let me know what your decision is. That's not going to get you the signature. You need to be able to say, hey, what's going on? What's happening? Use your W's. Now, I'm telling you to stay at the table, but the only way you can stay at the table and continue to unfold the situation to figure out what's going on is you've got to have the right words. That's why I'm going on today about your dialogues, your talk tracks, your objection handling, and your scripts. You got to have the words, the determination at the table, and the right words. And it's not just the right words and the ability to stay there when most people would get up and walk away. You got to be able to deliver the message in such a way that it lands with the client. that they hear what you're saying, that it breaks through the resistance and it resonates with them. And the reason it resonates is because you understand what their issues are. Now, getting past the hesitation, when a client says they want to think about it, I'm going to give you a couple of techniques for this. The first one is when a client says, I want to think about it, you just can't. What I want you to do is use what I call the what is it technique. Now, somebody says, I want to think about it to me. I say, okay, just so I can get a clear picture in my mind's eye. What is it specifically you need to think about? Now, and then they're going to say, well, I just want to think about it. And I'm going to say, well, is it the price? Is it the dates? Is it the terms? And you'll very quickly find that the client will surrender what's holding them back. Well, let me tell you what it is. We had somebody in last night, and quite honestly, they said they would do it for less. We like you, we like your company, we like all the stuff you're doing. We just want to, make sure we net as much money as we can. So in a case like that, then I've uncovered what the reason is and I would deal with it. So I would, in your mind, lay out in the what is it technique, you're going to need to be able to ask it. And here's the thing about the technique. What is it? Is it price? And they say no. And you look up like you're thinking, is it terms? And they say no. And then you make your way through. You want to interview some other agents. They're going to tell you before you get through the list. But I would even have this list ready so you can ask those questions. Now, make it feel conversational. The other one I have for you is what I call the choice of three. So here's another technique that you can use when somebody says, I want to think about it. You take out a notepad, and the secret is the notepad and the pen, and you write 3 words on it: price, company, and me. And you say, when most homeowners are faced with making a major life decision, they're struggling with the price, they're not convinced the company is the right company, or they don't trust me to handle the details. And then you hand the client the pen and you ask them to underline or circle the one that they're struggling with the most. Now, the technique is nonverbal. It's actually really great because it's a written technique. So that you want to hand them the pen and give them the opportunity to do that. Now, the last one I have for you is the Columbo technique, and this is a last attempt when you're leaving the appointment and you still haven't been able to uncover what the real reason is. What I would do in a case like this is I'd say, hey, listen, I just have one more thing. And you want to ask him that question just one more time. I realize you're not saying no to me, but let's pretend you did. What would be the one thing that stops us from doing business? It's a great technique. It's got to be done as kind of almost by accident. It's kind of like it pops into your head before you're leaving, and this is how it comes out. Now, getting past the objection is what I wanted to talk to you next, and this is where we discover the real reason, and the client tells us why it is they're postponing this decision. So the first thing when somebody gives you an objection about commission or price, or they want to interview other agents, a lot of salespeople immediately go into like a fight mode, and they take on an aggressive position. And you don't want to do this because it puts distance between you and the prospect that you're attempting to convert to a client. So what I would do in a case like this, I would agree. I would say, you know what, it is a big decision. I understand. I understand that you want to get it right, and I understand how you feel. But just so I understand you clearly, step number 2, I'm going to ask some questions now. So you like me, you like the company. The only thing that's holding you back is you feel that you want to do your due diligence and interview some other agents. So that's what I'm hearing. Oh, okay. And then I want to isolate it. I'm going to say to them, is there anything else that would stop you from doing business? And if they say no, then you're going to say to them, okay, just out of curiosity, if I could prove to you that we were by far the best real estate company and the best agent locally to serve the situation, deploying the most tools and strategies and getting the results you're looking for, would you be at least interested in hearing what I have to say? I mean, if I could prove it to you, would you be then in a position that you wanted to give me that listing? And then what I want you to do is show them something of substance that's going to outline or offer a solution to their question. So in this case, I might do a comparison chart with other real estate companies and show them the products and services that I use locally that the other agents aren't. Elevating my position and maybe building a case for whatever your commission model is by delivering and deploying quality resources and tools. And finally, after I've done that, you got to be a closer in sales. You got to be able to ask that very tough question at the end. Now that I've showed you that, it makes sense. Wouldn't you agree? Can we move forward now? So those are the 6 steps that a sales professional uses. They're going to, and I'm going to run through them quickly with you. They're going to agree with people, not argue with them. They're going to question it so that they understand really what the issue is at hand. They'll isolate it to make sure that they're dealing with the specifics of the situation and and one issue at a time. We're going to use a sharp angle close next in step number 4. If I could prove to you, would you? You're going to show them something that supports what it is you're saying. And finally, you're going to get them to agree with you. And this is going to allow you to move it forward. Now, I bring all of this up because I want you to know this week, somebody with all the news that's going on is going to want to hit the pause button. And you're going to need to be prepared for that. Now, let's put these into 6 steps into practice. And let me give you some examples. So you're talking to somebody and the client says, the client says, what if the client says to you, houses are so expensive. I'm afraid to buy one now in case house prices go down and I end up losing money. So, and I think this is a real situation that's going to happen this week. House prices are high, and I'm not saying house prices are going to go down. I don't know that. But the client is reading all of this stuff. Interest rates are going up, possibly recession next year. Should we see house prices go down? Nobody wants to buy a house this week and find out that next year it was less and they feel like they made a bad decision. So you have to make them feel good about it. So what I want you to say to them is you want to agree with them. Many clients are feeling the same way, for instance, and I've heard this over and over again. So let me ask you this, just out of curiosity, just so I get a clear picture in my mind's eye. You guys do want to move. You'd like to be over in that new subdivision. You need that extra bedroom. It would cut the commute time down, but you're hesitating to make the decision because you're afraid maybe next year house prices dip a little bit and you don't want to pay too much for your house. And is that what I'm hearing? Is there anything else that would hold you back? No, that's basically it, Chris. Okay. Well, what if you knew by waiting until next year you'd end up losing a small fortune? Would you want to wait or would you feel comfortable moving it forward now? If I could prove to you, you'd actually lose money by waiting. And the person says, well, how are you going to do that? And I'm going to say, well, me first. And they're going to say, okay. I'm going to say, well, let me show you something. Historical market stats show us that if prices dip next year, they always go back up. And I bring this up to you because it's about affordability, not the purchase price. Now, you may argue house prices are expensive right now. And I would say to you, compared to maybe where they were 5 or 6 years ago, sure. But if you think house prices are expensive today, wait till you see what they're going to be worth in 5 years from now. The real question isn't about the purchase price today. It's about getting the house you've always wanted. That's really the important part of this conversation. So if we find you the perfect house, even if it went down a little bit next year, are you selling it next year? The person says, well, no, I'm not. Say, well, then it really doesn't matter what happens to your house unless you're selling it. The real important thing here is getting the house you've always wanted. And we can make that happen right now because selection is a little better than it has been. So in saying that, if we could get you the house you wanted, even if it went down, it doesn't matter because in 5 or 6 or 8 years from now, the house is going to have gone way up. Now that I've showed you all of that, doesn't it make sense? Now, keep in mind, the person wants to move. So you have to connect them and give them confidence the move's going to be okay. This isn't something they do from a utility perspective or as an accounting exercise. They do this because they emotionally want something. Help them connect those emotions. Now, the next one is I want to fix it up first. And you're going to run into this. People are going to say, I'm going to put it on hold till next spring. We're going to work on it over the fall and the winter. We're going to put it on the market. And I think if we do that, we can get a lot more money for it. Hey, I understand how you feel. A lot of people I know have tried to go through this exercise. Just out of curiosity, so I'm getting the clear picture in my mind's eye, you guys do want to sell. You like me. You like the company. You do want to move over to that new subdivision, but you just want to maximize your position here to reduce some of the costs when you get to the other side. Is that what I'm hearing? Is there anything else that would hold us back? Well, let me, if I could prove to you by actually renovating the house, you may actually be further behind than ahead. Would you at least like to see what I'm saying? Like, let me put it to you another way. If I could prove to you that you'd end up losing money by going through this exercise than actually putting more money in your pocket, would you at least like to know what I'm talking about? So then what you want to do is you want to explain to them that they would be surprised to understand how much the cost of renovations are. And I can promise you the renovations always cost people more than they thought, and they take longer than they expected. So they're always off schedule and they're always over budget. And in the process, they get frustrated with the exercise. I'd much rather see somebody take the time, effort, and energy and invest it into the next property than to leave that money on the table for the next person who comes in and buys the home they're in. Look, I think what you want to do is price it properly in the present condition that the home's in, make sure it's nice, tidy, and clean, and put it on the market. But at the end of the day, if you want to reduce your expenses on the new property, we don't want to leave money in the old property that we could use. So I think now that I've showed you that, that makes sense. The reality is that you guys need to come up with dialogues you're comfortable with. You need to come up with dialogues you're comfortable with, and you got to understand that these problems are going to come up, and you need to be prepared for them. So, and I think that probably right now we're dealing with the holidays are coming. So you're going to hear, I want to wait until after the holidays. You're going to be dealing with inflation, possibly the price of fuel, the uncertainty with the wars, and I could go on and on and on. Our clients, your clients, are reading this in the newspaper. They're watching the news at night. They're hearing this daily. And now they're going to hesitate on you. So don't get caught, get prepared. And in the process, you're going to be in a better position. All right, Chris, I think that brings us up to our questions. Now, I was going to ask you if I was going to ask anybody if it's time to take the poll. And if you enjoyed today's content, please put some comments in the chat for us, and we'll do that. So now, when you're ready and you're interested in building an elite team, we have coaches that can help you do that. We've got some great one-on-one coaches. So reach out and talk to us about that stuff. And that brings us up to our Q&A point, Chris.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And Chris, I can firsthand attest to renovations always take longer than they're supposed to and always cost more, having just come out of that. So that is sage advice. Now, listen, this whole conversation about objection handling is not only timely, but it's also timeless. And it's so important that we get this word out. So thank you for sharing that with everybody today. As we move in now to the section of the program that I think is super relevant, it's where we reach out to each one of you, and you can ask any question you want to about the topic that we discussed today, or any other topic regarding real estate as well. It's all fair game. So with that, I'm going to slide on over here to the Q&A section. And by the way, if you've got something in mind, just put it in there for us. We will get to you as soon as we can. But let's go ahead and get things kicked off here. Let's start with the first one from James. Actually, James from the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Fantastic. James, you said if you have a great listing presentation that's handling most of your objections, I'm not sure if my presentation is great. How do I handle the really difficult objections while I'm doing my presentation? Do I push those back? Do I address them right in the middle of the presentation?
Well, let's start with the presentation. You'll open up with questions. Those questions are where you gather some of their concerns. As you make your way through the presentation, you want to attach their concerns to your solutions that you would identify in the presentation. So you're going to find that, James, it's going to move most of the questions out. But there are going to be, in the middle of the presentation, they're going to ask you a question. So what I always like to do, James, is I like to give my clients a notepad and a pen. And I say to them, if you ask, you're going to want to ask questions as we make our way through. But if you do that, it breaks the cadence of the presentation. And most of the time, I'm going to answer the questions before the presentation is over. So what I suggest you do, James, is, and if I'm talking to you as if you were a client, write down your questions as we're making our way through the presentation. At the end of the listing presentation, the question I'm going to ask you, James, is this. Now that we've got to the end of the presentation, I wanted to check to see if you had any unanswered questions on your notepad that we hadn't answered thoroughly for you. Now, the neat thing about this notepad, James, and they're writing down their questions, is I'm going to promise you, you do a great presentation, most of those questions are going to be gone. You might be left with one or two from a clarification perspective. But after you answer those, James, you need to look at them and say, do you have any more questions? To which they'll respond, no, I think you've answered them thoroughly. And what that does is it gives us the authority to hand them a pen and basically say, metaphorically today, if you're doing it digitally, but basically say, the only thing we have left to do is okay some of the paperwork, and we can get that sign up. So it's a really nice close, because basically if they have no more questions, they've green lighted you to the finish line. So good question, James.
Excellent. Chris, this comes in from Nancy, and boy, this is a question that I think comes up a lot, and that is, she asks, what if one homeowner is ready and wants to sell, but the other one just isn't quite ready yet, isn't convinced? What should I do?
Well, Nancy, there's there's layers to this question, um, and I do think it comes up because I do think when we have partners or husband and wives, you're going to find that one of them is more enthusiastic and one is a little less enthusiastic. Sometimes it's the economics. Sometimes people get dug into where they are and they just want to stay where they are, and it's just more comfortable not to move, even if the move would be better for them. Sometimes it's just easier in their mind to stay where they are and not deal with all the disruption around this. So, what you want to do, Nancy, is in your questions, you want to find out why they're moving. And you want to be thoughtful of the conversation that's unfolding in front of you. So, you want to figure out in the conversation when you're asking questions, who's doing the talking and what type of, you see, let me put it to you another way, Nancy. I've read recently that 90% of communication is nonverbal. So you need to be, when you're doing your presentation, you need to be looking over your computer screen at the clients, because the one that's not convinced, they're going to have tells. Sometimes it's an eye roll, sometimes it's an eyebrow, sometimes they sit there with their arms crossed, assuming that the room's not cold. These are messages that people are saying to you. What you need to do in a case like that, Nancy, is you need to connect to the person that's hesitant. And you need to kind of say, I'm getting a sense here that not everybody's really comfortable with the whole idea of moving forward at, Mach 1. So I wanted to ask just out of curiosity, and then you ask those questions. And maybe in a case like that, Nancy, you point the question to the person that's
Mhm.
giving you those signals, and see if you can get them to open up to you. And then what you want to do, and I know this sounds, you want to use the power of the relationship with the person who wants to move. You want to get them helping you convince the person who's dug in a little bit. Now, between you, the questions, and some of the responses you're going to get from the person who does want to move, I think that you can move this thing up to the finish line and get the sign up and get it going. But you know what, Nancy? I would say to you, you're 100% right. If you ignore the no or the person who's giving you resistance, at the end of the presentation, they're going to do I want to think about this and we need to talk about it in private. And I don't want to make a decision until we've slept on it. These are all of the things that come up when you
Mhm.
didn't dig in deep enough and find out really what was going on with the person who was resistant. Maybe they're going to say, well, the whole moving thing is just overwhelming. And I just think the whole idea of packing is just, I don't want to go through this. Maybe in a case like that, you say, hey, I understand moving can be very uncomfortable. But let me ask you this: if you we could magically move the house and you didn't have to deal with it, and we could just relocate you into that next property with all of the benefits and the features. I mean, if that was even possible, and I know that it's not, but let's pretend if it was, would you? And the person says, yeah, you know what? If I magically could move, yeah, then that wouldn't be an issue. So then, Nancy, what you want to do in a case like that is talk about professional movers, packers, people who do all of that stuff, what that might look like, and if it gave them peace of mind and was able to help them. Keep in mind, Nancy, you got to offer that solution. So, yeah, that's how I would deal with that. But good question. Excellent question.
Yeah, real world questions. And I tell you, we're faced with them every single day, right, Chris? I mean,
Yeah.
you're really touching at the heart of, I think, the communication between buyers and professional real estate practitioners. And the stronger we can make that skill set, the more effective we're going to be down the road. Jenny asked a really good question. I think you're going to like this one. Um, Jenny says, "Hi, Chris. Thank you for doing this." A little shout out there. She said, "I find myself getting defensive when someone brings up an objection, and I know I shouldn't be. Do you have any techniques or ideas that would make me feel more comfortable when I receive an objection?"
Yes. Um, and I want to say, Jenny, I want you to know that it's normal because we almost feel at times like we're attacked. And it's not our client's job to communicate effectively. It's our job to communicate so that they understand what we're saying. And I have to tell you that my experience tells me that there are a lot of people out there who are not great at communicating. Sometimes their tone, body language, or even choice of vocabulary can come across as aggressive. And we feel like we've actually been punched. And it's normal for us when somebody takes a poke at you to take a poke back. And then the distance, unfortunately, gets further and further apart,
Mhm.
not closer and closer together. So what I need you to do, Jenny, is I need you not to react what I need you to do is take a breath, pause like you're thinking about it for a second. And it's okay not to answer right away. It's okay to kind of look off to the left, drop your head a little bit like you're thinking, and say, hey, I hear you. I hear you. And I get it. But let me just see if I got this thing. Now you go right back to the 6 steps. And it's that 6 steps that I just taught you that are golden, absolutely golden. So we don't argue when you feel like you've been attacked. You question for clarity. You isolate, then you show them or tell them something that proves the point on why they should be moving forward, and then you close for that decision. So the 6 steps are the solution. But to answer that question, Jenny, is just don't react right away. And when you look at the 3Ds, dialogue, determination, and delivery, the delivery here is important because if you deliver with empathy, change your body posture,
Mhm.
drop the tone in your voice, and the person's going to say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said it that way. And now you've changed the direction of the conversation because they know they've acted inappropriately because you didn't come on strong. You kind of dropped your head a little bit in your shoulders. You give them that puppy dog look and you say, hey, I get it. And the person's going to say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said it that way. Now we're back where we need to be and we can start to unfold that conversation and turn that situation around. Now, I want you to know that some of the skills we're talking about right now, they're advanced selling skills. There's a lot of little things, nuances into this conversation we're having today. These should be applied when it is the right decision for somebody, not right for you, right for them. And I can tell you that buying a home, if you need a little confidence, buying a home is a great decision anytime. Even right now, it is the right thing to do. 5 years from now, they're going to be happy and they're going to thank you. You persuaded them to move forward. What else do we have, Chris?
So, well, first of all, Brandon, John, Sally, thank you for your questions and comments. We'll get to those in a quick second. But first, um, I just want to step back on that pause you just said, Chris, because I think that that's one of the biggest gifts that we can give ourselves, right? Is just take a deep breath. And then I love the 6 steps. And I don't care if you've been selling real estate for 47 years and you're doing $130 million a year in volume, or it's your first day in the business. Those 6 steps are sage. So thank you for sharing those. And if you didn't write them down, everyone write those down. Make sure you've got them. If you missed it, catch the recording and get those written down because they are sage. All right, from Seattle now, Pat says, I have a client who thinks that a recession is coming and that house prices and interest rates are going to go down if they just wait. What should we do? Very in keeping what you said, we were talking about earlier in the session today.
I do think, Pat, based on what I've read, there is a good chance that next year we're going to see a recession. You know, the interesting thing about economics, and I'm not an expert in this field, I'm a sales guy, I'm a real estate guy, I'm not an economist. Every morning I read whatever I can get my hands on that I think is going to affect your business. And on any given day, we're getting a difference of opinion. You know, the last week or 10 days ago, the US economy is doing really well. The unemployment rate is really low. The government is concerned. They're thinking that inflation is going to be a problem. They're going to raise. Now, they raise the rates to slow the economy down, which basically pushes us into a recession.
Mhm.
After we get in the recession, they lower the interest rates to pick the economy up so things get going again. Now, I think it was Pat that asked the question. Was it Pat? So, what I was going to say to you, Pat, is this: trying to forecast the economy is like trying to predict the weather. And yeah, we get a general idea what might be coming in. And maybe we're getting even better at predicting some of this stuff. But I got to tell you that it's virtually impossible. I mean, last week we were talking about, gas going to $100 a barrel or oil going to $100 a barrel. This morning they're talking about 150. So, there are so many external factors that play into this. So my answer, Pat, is this. There is a chance that we might see, and I am not an economist, we might see a recession next year. We could see house prices dip. We may or may not. We may see interest rates dip. We may or may not. But what I would say to you is this. When you buy your house, Pat, will you be selling it next year or the year after? Chances are no. In fact, let me ask you this, Pat. When you do buy the house, how long are you going to keep it for? Now, most people will say, even though you and I are in real estate and we know that that's not the reality, most people are going to say, this is the last move. I am never moving again. This is going to be the house forever. And we know 5, 7 years from now, they're moving again and they're moving another 7 years after that. I bring this up because what I would say to them is whatever happens with rates and house prices, unless you are selling the property, it doesn't matter if we have a rate dip next year or a house dip. What I am going to say is if we find you the perfect house, the one you've always dreamed about, and even if you paid a little bit more, oh, sidebar, Chris, let me give you an example. My dad bought his first house. My dad's passed now, but he bought his first house, oh God, when I was about 6. He paid $13,000. Now I went back and checked on that same house, and that house today sells for 1.3 million. Now I will tell you this: if you think real estate's expensive today, wait till you see what it's going to be worth in 5 years. Wait till you see what it's going to be worth in 10 years.
Yeah,
So
that's
whatever they
right.
paid Pat right now for the house, it may seem like a bit of a premium, but the real question is, did they get the house they've always dreamed about? The mortgage rate we can renegotiate. That's not a big deal. But the most important part, Pat, is not the price and not the interest rates. It's the house. Buying a home is an emotional decision, not a
Mhm.
financial one, unless you're an investor. And we're not talking about investment real estate. We're talking about residential real estate. People buy what they love. And if the home they've always wanted is available, they're going to buy it. And they'll deal with the house price and the interest rates. And trust me, Pat, 5 years from now, no matter what they paid, it's going to look like a deal. Pat, I'll give you an example. And this is a real life story. This is my story. The house I'm in right now, I paid 20 years ago $574,000, which seemed like an awful lot of money. But by today's standards, that house today is about 1.5 million. And that was in 20 years. When I bought it, Pat, I was terrified. Like any homeowner, I was stretched a little bit. Tina and I were like, oh my God, are we doing the right thing? Today, when we look back, we think, my God, that was the best decision we ever made. We love our house, Pat. We ain't moving. We're staying there. We love the house. It's perfect. So my suggestion, Pat, is get them the house they've always wanted. All right. So
Excellent.
hope that helps.
Thank you, Chris. All right. So, and I'm looking here. First of all, Brandon throws out a great idea. Thank you, Brandon from Colorado. He says one of the best things I ever learned was learning to fish in the ugly pond, meaning pulling out all the reasons why not. So I think more of a comment than a question, but thank you for the sage input. Um, I love this hour, Chris, because it gives people the opportunity to invest in themselves. Take just a moment and get better at what we all do every single day. Now, John asked this question. He says, how do I convince the sellers that their house is actually worth less than what they think it's worth?
Oh, okay, John. So I need you to be really good at doing your evaluations. I need you to lay out the properties that have sold, and I need you, John, as a professional. Now, okay, and this is going to go beyond the scope of what most people and most of your competitors are willing to do. But a really spectacular CMA where you've done your research and you've done your adjustments for things like lot sizes, time and relationship to when it's sold, square footage costs, upgrades, all of that stuff. And you want to take a look at the stuff that is sold and the stuff that's presently for sale. And you never tell John, you never tell somebody what their home is worth. You lay out all of the data for them and you organize it and structure it in a way that somebody who doesn't deal in real estate every day will be able to do a comparison. They'll be able to look at it. It's like how you and I come up with prices. We compare things, but if you could lay it out very simple and clear for people, then what happens is they're able to look at your table, for instance, where you've got the different properties that are for sale. And you say to them, John, don't tell them how much their home is worth. Let's say, let's discover it together. I was able to find similar homes that sold and ones that are presently for sale, so we won't have to guess at the price. Let me take you through the evaluation data, and then you can choose. And I'm saying to the homeowner now, John, you can choose where the best place is to price your property. So then, John, what I do is I take a look at the ones that have sold, and then I go to the ones that are for sale, and I say, these are the ones that are presently on the market. If you had to compare your home, John, to these properties, where would you place it? Now, I want you to know, John, that normally people price it higher. They say, I think we should be over here. And what you're going to do is say, let's take a few minutes then and investigate the properties that are listed for less than ours. You have to know human nature. And human nature tells us people are attracted to the property or the house, the home, that offers the most for the least. We do that everywhere we shop. We comparison shop. I don't care if it's a television, a car, if it's running shoes. Where am I going to get what I want at the best price? So then what we're going to do, John, is we're going to put it back on them. And we're going to say, take a look at the ones that are south of us in price. Where would you place your home? And then they take a look at it and they go, because keep in mind, John, if we make our house more expensive than comparable properties, people will look at our house, but they'll write on the competition, not yours. So what we want them to do is write on your property. We want them to give you an offer, and your home has to be priced attractively, not too little that we leave money on the table, but not so much that it becomes a strategy to sell the other properties in the community. So what I need you to do is price it at the front of the line, but very close to the front. And let's take another look at this, John. Where do you think your home should be? And then John says, well, I think, yes, based on everything you're saying, I should be here. We really hope to get a little bit more. And I say, well, the first thing I'm going to say, John, is you picked the right spot. Now, by adopting that position, the number of people that are out there presently looking, you may find ourselves in a multiple offer situation where we may go a little higher than what we were expecting because somebody is actually bidding against somebody else. We've all got all kinds of history to demonstrate this. So it's not like this would be the first time that that this has happened. So we've got that history. But I would really like you to try to get that house to the front of the line, John. I'll give you an example. My neighbor listed his property. When I say neighbor, I mean right next door. Last Saturday, they put the home on the market, and by Saturday at 1 o'clock, the house was sold, and it sold just above the asking price. And there are other homes in the neighborhood. I would imagine that buyer went and looked at the other 3 or 4 homes and were drawn to this property because of the price, and it sold literally in hours. Even under interest rates and market conditions and economy, you get it right, and someone's going to buy it right away. All right. Any more, Chris?
Great example. Yes, we got Susanna asked a question about the link. She said, asking about the link you provided for cost versus value. It's in US dollars. Do you have a website suggestion for Canadian dollars?
I don't. So I apologize about that. That's a great little resource for south of the border. The Canadians could investigate that, and you're probably going to have to add a little common sense to the exercise. I mean, was it Suzanne that asked that question? Suzanne?
Yes, that's correct. That is correct.
I was going to say, the easiest way for me, Suzanne, and because I travel back and forth across the border every day, almost all the time for work, is I typically just add 30% to everything. So if you want to think of it that way, the cost of most of our stuff is about 30% higher in Canada versus the US. So it's kind of a rule of thumb, down and dirty, not surgical, but it'll give you a bit of an idea. And I don't know of anything on north of the border that has that. So sorry about that.
No,
Good
that's fine.
question.
This is a tech one, and maybe Tina can help us out. But it says this question is out of today's topic. Can you refer me to a company that can print postcards and send them to the post office as per my choice of the postal walks, or maybe a carrier route, for example? And then I send them the needed documents. I was using a company called ColorTech, but they stopped providing this service. Thank you in advance. And I think what we'll do there is we'll just if you don't have that off the top of your head, Chris, we'll just send them that information after the session. I've got their contact info here.
So
Unless
Tina's
something
going to
comes to
type that
mind.
into the chat. So just watch the chat. Tina's going to give you a Canadian and an American company to do that. Excellent.
Wonderful. Fantastic. Okay, Sally from Oklahoma. And by the way, we've got approximately 6 minutes left. Thank you for throwing those questions in. We really appreciate that. Don't be shy. If you've got a question and you see the clock ticking down, send them in. We'll get back to you after the session as well. We'll make sure your questions are answered. Now, Sally from Oklahoma City says, I have clients right now and I know they want to move, but they think it's better to wait until next year. How do I convince them not to wait? Now, you took one angle at this earlier, but I think it's worthy of another run.
I think that Sally, what I would say is that people don't sell houses because they're going to sell a house. People sell houses because they got a new home in mind. So if you want people to move, often I find real estate agents focus on the property they're selling, not the property they're moving to. Remember, it's an emotional decision. If you want people to let go of where they are, you got to increase the reason to go where it is they thought they wanted to go. So, and I've got all kinds of examples of real estate agents who have screwed this up and did it backwards. I'll give you a very quick example. I had a while back, and I've told this story before to people in my classes, but Tina and I thought we were going to sell our house at one point and get a townhouse. Thought maybe just making our life simpler would be the way to go. And the real estate agent we had come over and look at our house, he was so taken with our property, and he continued to highlight all of the wonderful things that we had done in upgrades, that by the time the appointment was over, Sally, he sold our house back to us. And I looked at Tina. I said to her, honestly, we got to think about this. And after he left, I said, I've forgotten all the great reasons why we bought this house. I mean, why are we doing this? So the problem here, Chris, to connect it to Sally's question, was the real estate agent in my case didn't listen to me, and he didn't understand that maybe having less work around, like,
Mhm.
if he had looked at our backyard and said, "Oh my God, your landscaping is fabulous, but I can see how much work this is," it would have confirmed my decision to be moving to the townhouse. And then if he looked at the house and said, "It's beautiful, but this is really too much house for you and Tina. I mean, do you really need this space? I think it makes more sense to be in a townhouse." I guess you spend a lot of time looking after the property. I bet now at this point in your life, you'd really like to spend more time maybe traveling and getting out and having a different experience. But he didn't do any of that. So what he did was he continued to reconnect us back to our own property, and we never let go of it. So to answer your question, Sally, if you want people to move, you got to get them to let go of where they are. And to do that, you have to strengthen the connection or the idea behind where it was they wanted to go. Hey, I love what you've done, but Mo, you know what? Life is going to be so much simpler over here. Wow, you've done a really neat job with this. That's a lot of work, though. I can see why you'd want to be moving to another property. So I'm complimenting them. I'm not saying, oh my God, I can't believe you guys did this. I'm complimenting them, but then I'm using that opportunity, Sally, to connect them to where they want to go. That's why the questions at the very beginning of the presentation are so important, because it's in a casual way I uncover all of the reasons. And then I connect those reasons back to them when they start to stall on me, to convince them this is what they wanted to do. Selling things to people is so easy once you understand how to do it.
It's so true. And there's a process, right? Like everything else is a
Yeah,
process. You've got to learn it, get good at it, and then be confident in what you're doing. And always remembering that you're providing a valuable service. Like the
very
people
valuable.
need to have help. They need a guide, right, through this process. So, all right, we've got time for one more question, but we've got a number of folks here that have got questions in. Don't worry, we will get back to you. But Matt, I think you asked a question that probably comes up for a lot of people. And that question is, sometimes scripts sound like a contrived conversation. I don't want to be a pushy salesperson. How do I make
Mhm.
it not sound salesy? I don't want to be that guy, but I know I need to have a system.
So, Matt, what I would say is, in the very beginning, it's really hard. Let me say it this way, Matt. It's really hard to acquire the conversation skills until you've spent some time in our business. So I'm not sure how long you've been in the business, and nobody wants to sound like that cheesy, pushy car or pushy salesperson. It's not fair to say that to car people. You don't want to come across as that cheesy, pushy salesperson. So what do you do? It's really important. First of all, let me say this, Matt. If you want to learn dialogue and script, the way I did it was through repetition. I listened to all the scripts and the dialogues over and over and over, and I internalized them, and I took ownership of them, and then I paraphrased them in a conversational way that didn't feel scripted and it didn't feel pushy. It felt like you and I were having a conversation and we were talking. You brought up a concern. I acknowledge, I address, I help you resolve the concern. We move forward, and it's comfortable. It's done over a cup of coffee. It's very relaxed. Nobody's feeling like they're being pushed. But understand something: as a sales professional, you always talk with intent. I listen carefully. I understand what your issue is, and I get right in behind that to make sure I am able to resolve it, and I do it conversationally, so you don't feel like I've been, using that hard sell on you, and you're like, you know what? Now that we've had this discussion, it makes sense. I love what you're saying. So I hope that answered it, and I think that
It sure
almost
did.
brings us up to the last 30
You
seconds or
know, it
so.
just does. It's amazing, isn't it? Oh my gosh. Well, listen, that is a wrap for today's session. And I want to thank you, Chris, for sharing your expertise, your
Thank
perspective,
you.
your great ideas. And then a huge, big thank you to everybody that's joining us today. Thanks for taking the time to sharpen your saw to become the very best version of yourself. And speaking of your very best, if you're in search of the highest quality, customized one-on-one coaching and support experience, be sure to check out all the information at coachingtoconfidence.com. Go to the bottom, hit contact, go see Melanie. We'll make sure you got all the information that you need. But listen, until next week, stay focused, stay disciplined, and stay committed to ensuring that your best years are your next years. Thank you again for joining us.